Big thanks to our sponsors who make the pudding possible. The American Camp Association of Illinois is made up of nearly 289,000 members, volunteers, campers, families, and professionals who believe in the power of camp. They work to disrupt the effects of poverty by providing fundamental services for children and families and learning opportunities for camp professionals. Learn more about ACA Illinois by visiting acail.org. You know the impact you want to make in a child's life, but figuring out the day-to-day details can be overwhelming. Let Camptivities help you make that impact by streamlining the creation of your camp activity schedules. Schedule a demo at camptivities.com.
Welcome to the pudding.
The sweet proof of research to back up what you already know about summer camp. Hi, I'm Dr. Mandi Baker. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Travis Allison, and mine are he and him.
Today, we're talking with Jake Sorenson from Sacred Playgrounds. Jake is the founder and director of Sacred Playgrounds, a ministry offering research and training to camps and their partner ministries. He has a PhD in practical theology from Luther Seminary, an MDiv from Princeton Theological Seminary, and more than 20 years of experience in camping ministry and congregational youth ministry.
Jake has authored numerous articles on camping ministry, has taught in colleges and seminaries, and has presented at camps and conferences across the USA. He is the author of the book, Sacred Playgrounds. Jake, welcome to the pudding. Welcome back to the pudding.
It is great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
When we were excited to bring you back to focus specifically on the research that you folks are doing at Sacred Playgrounds, would you mind starting us off with just kind of an overview of what Sacred Playgrounds does and what your focus is within summer camps and, as we alluded to, within church camp ministries?
Yeah, we're really storytellers. We're trying to use data to tell stories. And so what we would say is that Sacred Playgrounds generates insights, we equip leaders, and we connect partners in order to help camp ministries thrive. And so that's really what we're about, trying to help specifically Christian camp ministries connect with their partners in the homes and in congregational ministries, and to help them understand what these research insights mean on the ground to their programs. So that's both to help them improve their programs, but also to help them use the data and the research to tell their story in a compelling and a new way.
Yeah. I want to pick up because I try to find terms that others that we're not explaining well enough and push us each to explain them. Camping ministries is probably a term that if you haven't grown up in church camp is an interesting term or an interesting way to describe camp. And even I think in other faith-based camps, they may not use that kind of language. Do you mind talking us through that?
Sure. Yeah. So we would talk about ministry as what we do in regards to the other. And so when we're working with the other in helping them through difficult challenges in life, helping them through process of formation, character formation, and faith formation, specifically for things that we would talk about that as ministry. And so we're teaching young people to minister to one another. So what does it mean when my friend or my cabin mate or that kid over there who I have never met before is having a rough day and I'm there coming alongside of them? We would call that an act of ministry. And so helping them understand that they are also ministers. Of course, we also talk about professional ministry. So people might be familiar with that term in terms of like a pastor or a priest or a deacon, a clergy person we talk about as a minister. Well, that's their professional vocation, right? And we would talk in Christian circles about each and every one of us as being a minister to the other. And so not only the people that get paid for it, but everybody is called to ministry in the world. And whether we're in pastoral care or chaplaincy or something like that, or we're doing something totally different and we're encountering people in the workforce or on the street or our neighbor, how are we living our lives in ministry to the other? And so we talk about camp ministry specifically to differentiate probably Christian camp from other types of camp. Because there are some distinctives. Of course, there are some things that are very, very similar across the entire camp industry. And we can talk about those as well and how the research that we do at Sacred Playgrounds relates to other research as well. But that's how I would use it and differentiate it. Of course, we fit under the larger umbrella of faith-based camps. And so there's a lot of Jewish camps, and some of the colleagues that I work with in research do research on specifically Jewish camping. And there's a lot of overlap between some of the things that we do and some of the things that we find in faith-based camps. And then, of course, Muslim camps as well. There's quite a few Muslim camps. And so it's been really fun to get to know some of our Muslim colleagues and learn about how faith and faith formation fits in with their character development and their programs in their camp programs as well.
Yeah. And I think also camps have learned, especially church camps that belong to a larger church organization, have learned to embrace attaching ministry to the work that we do in camp's constant fight for validity within larger organizations. And that's been a way I think that church camps have been able to say, we are professionals at ministering to
Absolutely.
kids.
So sometimes camps are seen as sort of parachurch organizations or something that we in the professional church world send kids to camp and they come back. And kind of recentering that's something that Sacred Playgrounds has been working on, and understanding that camp is part of church, part of the larger ecology of faith formation, as we would put it, alongside what's happening in the home and what's happening in the local church or the synagogue or the mosque in those other faith traditions. And so understanding that we're partners, and that partnership happens a little more intentionally at faith-based camps than it might at other types of camps that are more separated from these other youth development spaces. Of course, there are some great camp school partnerships that happen. And so some of those are naturally connected between camp and that other space. But most camps are separate, right? And they don't have those natural partners. And so that's one of the real benefits of church camps, is that we oftentimes have those built-in partnerships and relationships, and we're after many of the same goals. And so working alongside one another rather than at cross purposes is something that we really try to help with at Sacred Playgrounds. And so that's the connecting partners piece. How can we connect camp leaders with their partners in positive youth development and, for our purposes, for faith formation?
So what inspired you to focus your research on Christian summer camps? What got you started?
What got me started? Yeah, so it's been a big part of my life and my life story and my calling and my vocation. And so I was sent to camp as a young person. I probably wouldn't have chosen to go. I was part of a church program that's a kind of a Christian ed program that we do in middle school called Confirmation in the Lutheran church. I grew up Lutheran. And so my pastor said, you're going to camp as part of this program. And so I did, and had an amazing time, and really focused on some identity issues. And do I really believe this stuff? You know, it was kind of that crisis of faith moment. And like, this has all been like imparted to me. Do I actually believe this? Do I own this? And so exploring those questions for the first time at camp became a really powerful experience for me personally, and understanding what my role might be and what the gifts that I have might be used for in this world. And I think camps are great places for young people to unwrap those gifts and to understand, what have I been gifted with and how might I contribute to society? And so that was part of my experience at camp as well. So I grew up I went to camp a couple times, and then ended up working at Christian summer camp, and had a call to vocational ministry in the church. And camp was a bbig part of that. So that's why I ended up going to seminary, worked in the church for a number of years as a youth ministry professional. And in youth ministry, there's tons of research and tons of books out there about the practice of ministry and how to work with young people and connect them with the church and things like that. And so that was all wonderful, and I was in my element there. When I got called back to camp, came back to Wisconsin, where I'm from, in the United States here, and was like, okay, where are all the books on camp? Where's all the research on camp? And there really wasn't a lot out there at the time. And so one of my mentors eventually said, well, maybe you need to do something about this. Maybe this is part of your vocational calling. Maybe some of your unique gifts are being brought together to answer some of these questions. And so that's what led me back to get my PhD and to do some of the research on camp. And, you know, I kind of thought, okay, maybe I'll either go back to camp or I'll teach or do something like that. But as I was getting involved in these research projects, more and more camps were interested in hearing about it and getting their own research. And so that is where Sacred Playgrounds came from just kind of the momentum of the research and people saying, we want more of this. Can you give us more of this? And so I never intended to kind of start a business out of this or anything. That's just something that has naturally progressed. And so we've kept going with the research and have tried to lean into that. So I keep one foot in the academic world and the other foot in the practical world, and really trying to help people on the ground make sure that this research is translated into practice, because that's what's most important. I don't want to be in some musty library sitting there, you know, for PhD students. I need it to be practical on the ground for the people that are actually engaged in the ministry and making a difference in this world. That's what I'm really committed to.
Your research highlights key characteristics of Christian summer camps, like building relationships and creating a safe space, active participation, stepping away from home life, and centering faith. Could you talk more about why these matter?
Yes, absolutely. So this comes out of our grounded research project that we started with when I was still in the PhD program, actually. And so we got some funding to do a grounded study and say, what is camp? What are some of these elements that actually make camp work? And are there any things that have lasting impacts on these young people? Or is it just a brief high that quickly fades? Because that's oftentimes what you hear in other circles, people that don't really get camp. They'll say, yeah, it's great. They had fun. They made some friends, but then kind of that happiness fades after a while. So they call it the camp high. And so what do any of these things last? So that's what we really were after. And as we were doing these site visits and focus groups and interviews and surveys of parents and talking with campers and staff, what we noticed was that there were common themes as they were talking about camp. And when one of these elements was missing, they would say things like, it just didn't feel like camp. And so a young girl at camp might be like, this year, we just didn't click. Our cabin group didn't click. It just didn't feel like camp. And the relational aspect broke down for her. And she was comparing it to previous years where she really felt like they got together and they, as one of them put it, it was like a 500-piece puzzle that you took out of the box for the first time and we all just fit together. There's this idea at camp that we all just fit together somehow, even though we had never met. And so this relational aspect of camp. And that became one of what we call the 5 fundamental characteristics. And so these were the things that sort of bubbled to the top and were identifiable through this qualitative research that we did. And so that you mentioned them. And so the characteristics are, one, that camp is unplugged from home, that camp is physically separated and emotionally separated from these permanent spaces. So it gives time and space away for things like independence, for things like, hey, who am I really? Trying to explore these identity issues and try on new identities at camp. If maybe back home, I'm always the middle child or the youngest child or the one that gets picked on or the smart one or the sporty one, whatever. At camp, I can be something different. I can try something new in a way that I might not be able to in other spaces. So that unplugged from home. And also, of course, we're using the word unplugged because camp is literally unplugged from these devices that the young people have become so accustomed to. And so that becoming an important part of what it means to be unplugged from home. And something that they bring up in focus groups over and over, even as we do focus groups in the last couple summers, we ask, what makes camp different? And the kids always bring up the separation from technology, being unplugged. And they always, without fail, when we bring that up, they always say, it's such a relief. I like it better. It's so wonderful that people look me in the eyes. And so that being unplugged from home is one of the important characteristics. Camp is participatory. Of course, we talk about this all the time in camp and in camp research and literature and things like that we learn through experiential learning and through doing, not just sitting and listening. Camp is relational. And so I already talked about this a little bit, but we're building relationships with our peers. We're building relationships with those near peer mentors, the camp counselor, and sometimes other adults that are present. Camp is a safe space. And a safe space, not just physical safety here. When we say safe space, we mean mentally, emotionally, psychologically, socially, spiritually safe. It's safe to try new things. It's safe to be myself. And so sometimes the campers will use those words. I feel like I can be my true self at camp. What a beautiful thing that we're able to give the young people. And a safe space from things like being picked on. A safe space at religious camp, to express doubts. They might not feel safe to do that in other spaces and say, do I really believe this? And to mess around with those ideas. And then we say that camp is faith-centered. And so this is what would really set Christian camps and religious camps apart from some of the rest of the camping community. So we would say that all 5 of these things need to be present for it to be called an effective camp. And I would say for those that are not faith-based camps or religious camps, what is that other thing that would be at the center? What's that 5th thing? What's that core mission and that core value that would be at the center of your camp? And that might be a substitute for those camps. But for our purposes, those are the 5 fundamental characteristics. When those things are in place, we say it makes space for the camp experience to happen. And every individual that comes to camp experiences those things based on the memories and the experiences that they brought to camp and their readiness to experience these things, and they lead to common outcomes. But it doesn't, we use the word playgrounds in the name intentionally. We don't think camp is a laboratory. We don't think like you just add these ingredients and then you get out a new person or you get out these outcomes. Camp is a playground. Camp is a place of experimentation and wonder. There are boundaries like a playground might have at school or something like that. So it's important that there are boundaries, but it's also important that there's free play and that the kids have a lot of say in their experience, and that they're able to take ownership and agency of those things and mess around a little bit. And so that's where the word sacred playgrounds would come from that concept of what camp is and does.
You talked about the kid saying that I feel more like myself. I had an interesting experience. When I was going to high school, Ontario High School had 5 years instead of 4, which is now the case. And so I would work at camp and go back to high school a couple of years, 3 years, in fact. And a friend of mine that I'd known since I was 3, when I got back to school the second or third year, said to me, Travis, every time you come back from camp, you're more like yourself. And it's like, yeah, see, this is why it means so much to me, finding a place for that for sure.
So I appreciate with some of the summer staff, similar things. Just I want to be my camp self in other places. And I find that when I go away from camp, I fall back into this person that I don't like or I don't want to be. And here I feel like I am my true self. So how can I make this person that person out there? And so it's an interesting conversation with some of these young adults, especially that are camp counselors, and trying to figure out their identity and who they are, and how they live that true self, that true identity in a space that's not camp.
Right. So these characteristics, and I appreciate you saying, Jake, that any camp can find that fifth element to pull all this together. But how can camp directors, our listeners, be intentional about fostering these qualities so that camps become more than a fun place, but is a meaningful experience in a kid's life?
Yes, absolutely.
Or staff's life.
Yeah, and I think that's why we really focus in on these 5, because I think taking them one by one and saying, how are we doing in this area? How are we doing in this area? And so a lot of the research that we do at Sacred Playgrounds is working with individual camps and helping them assess these 5 fundamental characteristics at their camp and finding the places that they really shine. And then also trying to identify those areas for program development and improvement. It's sometimes difficult to take an honest look at our programs because we all think our camp is the best, right? Which camp is the best? Well, it was my camp, of course, because I had these experiences, and this is why we do it. And taking an honest look is really important because sometimes we can get into rhythm of things at camp that's not always healthy. And we can get traditions that sometimes end up being sacred cows in the sense that we lift them up as something that's really important. It must be the core of what we do, but it's nowhere near the core of what we do. And sometimes it works as cross purposes to what we actually want to accomplish. One of the common things that camps struggle with is pranks. And I use this example all the time because it's so common at camps. Camps say, oh, it's wonderful to have these pranks and it helps build community and people are having fun. And I want to take a really close and honest look at that because I am very opposed to pranks because I have seen the damage that it can do, especially to those young people who are accustomed to becoming pranked or picked on in other spaces. Those kids are experiencing these pranks in a different way than some of these other kids. People might say, oh, just get over it. Oh, take a joke. Oh, let it roll off your back. Camp is that one place where some of these kids feel like they can be themselves, where they're not getting picked on. And now they feel targeted. Or now they feel like this is the way that we're supposed to treat one another and treat other people. Camp is supposed to be this place of kindness. And a lot of times these pranks get elevated to the point of not being kind and intentionally not being kind. Even if they're meant to, or people think that they build community, they can also break that community down. So taking an honest look at some of those things and saying, why are we doing this? And what is it teaching the campers? And I think we need to do this with every single program that we have, really take an assessment of this. What are we teaching the campers when we do this, when we act this way? And how can we improve this specific aspect? And so focusing on the 5 fundamentals can really help us do that, I think, in various ways. Okay, is it building community? Great. But is it violating safe space? Oops. Maybe that's something that we don't want to have at our camp anymore. And we can change these traditions. One of the great things about camp is once you do something for 2 years in a row, it's tradition. We've been doing it forever.
It's always been that way.
Yeah, people say that like, oh, we can never change that. Of course you can. Are you kidding me? Your people are turning over so frequently. Of course you can change that. It takes intentionality. It takes a focus on your core values and your mission. And so how are we improving these things? And so that's what we try to help folks do. So taking that honest assessment, it can be really valuable for these camps.
I think that's one of the deep lessons of being a camp director is that you get a lot of pushback on the first year, and the second year it's always been that way. And so if you just figure out how to handle and properly, intentionally set up that change in year 1, it's
You got it.
not a problem the next year.
And find your allies, right?
Yeah, totally.
Find those people that really get it and tell them the why, and they'll be on board. And they'll convince their peers and the campers, and this is the why. And everybody say, oh yeah, this is the why. This is why we do it. This is how we always do things here. Yeah. So you get those people on board, and selling the theory of it can be really important.
Yep. And it's classic camp counselor trick. Deputize the problem one. You're going to be my biggest helper in this.
Yep, you got it. You got it.
Yeah. One other thing, Jake, that I think that you said reinforces your thinking on pranks, because it was part of our culture too that we ended up working very hard to change, is that when you talk to the people who are doing the pranks, even within a very intentional community, a lot of the reasons why they want to do the pranks is because somebody did it to them.
Yep.
It was done to me, so I have to do it to others. And then having that staff, just saying to that staff, I would really like you to listen to what you just said.
Yeah. Is retribution one of our core values?
Yeah.
I mean, really trying to understand that. And the great thing about pranks is you can recenter them, and you can say there are other things, other forms of mischief that we can get involved with that are life-giving and life-building. And so one of the camps that I was actually program director there, and they had turned the pranks around and done this tradition of egging the cabins or toilet papering the neighboring cabins. And I had heard that this cabin got egged, and I was like ready to be furious and trying to figure out what is happening. And what they were doing is they were cutting out white pieces of paper in the shape of eggs, drawing a yolk on it, and then writing notes like, God loves you, you're amazing, I appreciate you. You like all these affirmations, right? And they would do the same with little squares of toilet paper and then just put them on the cabin. And so the counselor would wake up in the morning and go, you guys, we got egged, or we got toilet papered. And the campers would come out, oh, who did it? We're going to get them back. And what? Kind of the doggy head tilt, what? It's the reimagining of those things. And then when they seek to outdo one another, they're not outdoing one another in cruelty. They're outdoing one another in kindness. They're outdoing one another in generosity. Who can be the most kind? We're going to be even more kind than that other cabin, and find a new creative way to do that. That is the sort of competition that we want at camp. So really encouraging those sorts of things can be a reimagining of something like pranks. Again, that's a very specific example, but I think it's important to try to concretize some of these things rather than letting them float around as amorphous concepts.
We currently have googly eyes on the bread maker. The bread maker is called Chad. And all of this is just that kind of camp silly that comes into. I feel like one of my favorite camp pranks is putting googly eyes on everything, like randomly, just everything has a personality, character, naming all the inanimate objects. And so even in our household, this kind of joy. So, the joy that it brings, even if it's not totally directed towards a person or a thing. I'm collecting data at the moment on a study, and one of the things they keep talking about is the joy of just silliness, that camp is safe to be silly. Yeah. And that is actually kind of an interesting and an anomaly for adult living, right? There's not a lot of space for just being outright silly and just being unjudged or judged in a positive manner. So incredible.
One of the great things about, working with Christian camps is we can ground these things, biblically and theologically, and say, this is what we're called to do. We are called to love one another. We are called to be kind to one another. We are called to show mercy and to show forgiveness. And so being able to ground these things in this very important language and this theological language can be very powerful for the young people as well. And so they would understand something like a random act of kindness in a theological way and as ministry to somebody. And how can we do this random act of kindness and try our darndest to make sure that nobody finds out it was us? That's sometimes the competition, right? Like, I want to be so kind, and we're going to be so devious when we do it that nobody will know who did it, because we're not doing it to get accolades or to get an award or anything like that. We're doing it because this is what God's people do.
Yeah.
We show kindness to others. We show love to one another. And the point is not who did it. The point is that this is what we are called to do.
Did you know that ACA Illinois' primary work is getting young people to camp from communities that don't traditionally attend? This includes providing services to 9,000 kids and adults from low-income communities throughout the state of Illinois annually. ACA Illinois has deep roots in using camp as a way to create social change in local, state, and national communities, including creating equitable access for all children to attend camp. ACA Illinois loves to try new things and believes it's how we create the most dynamic impact for our campers, staff, and community. This is why ACA Illinois always jumps at the chance to collaborate with content experts and countless volunteers to develop new and innovative programming. Ready to help us achieve this mission? Join us at acail.org. Are you a camp professional looking for community? Are you a camp interested in accreditation but don't know where to start? Are you looking to grow your career? Are you looking for ways to give back? Reach out to us at info@acail.org and let's get you connected. Scheduling affects every camper and every staff member's summer. It's easy to make mistakes. It takes a ton of time. The bottom line, scheduling is hard. But it doesn't have to be. Let Camptivities help you create a balanced and engaging schedule without the mistakes and without those long days and late nights. Camptivities does it all. Auto scheduling, camper scheduling, group scheduling, elective scheduling, manual adjustments, over 60 different reports, tons of customizable settings, and so much more. Now is the time to find a better way to schedule this summer. And don't wait, next summer will be here before you know it. We'd love to show you the next big thing in camp. Visit camptivities.com to set up a time to chat. Let us help you get away from your desk and back out to camp.
Your work highlights the importance of creating space where campers feel safe asking really big questions about their faith.
Yeah.
How can camp directors cultivate this kind of environment?
Yeah. So that's a big question. So there's some things that are very specific to faith-based camps and some things that would be true at all camps. So certainly at all camps, making sure that there's an atmosphere of love and respect. And how are we making sure we're careful of our language and making that safe space so that people don't feel picked on, or if they feel that way, that we're immediately reaching towards reconciliation and forgiveness and understanding. Do you understand that what you said was hurtful? Do you understand why? Now, you see how that made this person feel, and talking through that and processing that and being sure that we prioritize those sorts of things, and respectful language can be really important. And I appreciate that, even the way that you introduce the podcast, right? By introducing yourselves and introducing your pronouns, you're making a statement about what this space is safe for, right? And so we can use language to create safe spaces as well. And specifically with religious camps, some kids are coming and they're not religious, or maybe they're anti-religious sometimes, and they were forced to come, or maybe they're at a place of doubt, or they're at a place where they're really struggling with understanding this. And making space for that is so important. It has to be a safe space to not believe. It has to be a safe space to ask questions, to doubt. And for us to make space for that is a really important thing. And not all Christian camps understand this. And I want to be clear on that. And some people think of Christian camps, and they might even see the title of who's the guest on the podcast and be like, I don't want to listen to this, because Christianity is deservedly, probably, at least from many people's perspectives, getting a really bad rap right now. Because there are some people who are claiming to be spokespeople for the Christian faith who are anti-Christian in their rhetoric and in their beliefs. And that becomes a real challenge as we're working in a Christian camping space, and understanding that those feelings of exclusion, of oppression, straight up oppression, are out there right now and are being vocalized right now from public officials.
Yeah.
And so speaking out against that becomes really important, and making sure that when we are running Christian camps or faith-based camps of any sort, that we are intentionally welcoming and intentionally speaking against that language of exclusion. Because our faith compels us to be inclusive. Our faith compels us to go beyond borders, as Jesus did over and over again, as Paul did over and over again, to people that were not like them, who were traditionally excluded, finding those people and being intentionally inclusive of those folks, and making sure that camp is doing that both in its language, but also in actuality, so that people come from outside of a tradition or an understanding that they are welcome, truly welcome.
And to dig into it, I think when you said it's out there, I also think it's in here. I think some people's most impactful experiences of exclusion and harm are in the close relationships with people who are Christian or call themselves Christian, who may not intentionally but inadvertently cause that judgment or that exclusion to happen. And I think back at my own sort of camp experience. I grew up in church camps, and there were folks in there, young, maybe lacking the maturity that they needed to in leadership positions, who probably did the most damage that I experienced and others did. And part of what motivated me to come back into camp research, because I wanted to understand, how does that happen? And how does that, what is the ripple effect? How does that go out from there? Of course, the thing about research, once you start getting into it, you start wandering. And I'm obviously in different areas now, but those questions were always sort of bubbling there, where it didn't feel safe to ask big questions. And I was always a curious kid. I was probably built for research right from the get-go. I had more questions than answers all the time. So while at times I think there's no two ways about it, the impacts of a greater society are going to always weigh in, and it will. In the current situation, obviously, there's a lot that's weighing in on a story, a rhetoric that sounds okay, but actions that are quite harmful or hurtful, or words that can sound charming, but actually where the actions can be very harmful. But I want to raise that idea that camp is in fact a very vulnerable place, and a spot has a lot of power, and the leadership are invested with a lot of power, and that power can inadvertently or intentionally be used to cause hurt. So what do you say when you have a camp situation like that? I have no doubt you've encountered situations where leadership are causing harm by the way that they make decisions or the language they make. How do you engage with that?
Yeah, as a consultant, if they're in a space of listening, then I find that as an opportunity to really talk with them about why this is hurtful and how they can adjust and change their language. Now, if they're not in a posture of listening, then that's a camp that I probably am not going to be able to work with, and I'm not going to be able to help. It's not going to be a good fit. I would, in fact, actually work against that sort of rhetoric and tell them that I would do that, because they would, in that case, they would be going against both my core values of Christianity, but also my core values of what camp is. And so I, as a Christian camp professional, I'm able to work with folks from the Jewish camping world and the Muslim camping world and the secular camping world and all these other folks, because they're doing some amazing things. We're partners in this, building up people for great humans in the world and practicing kindness and some of these values that our world desperately needs, that are core Christian values as well. And so if there are people at camp that are claiming to be Christians working against those very things, then I will work against that. And I have, and I will continue to do so. And that becomes one of the challenges, when I'm speaking with people who are not in the Christian camping world and might have based their assumptions of Christian camp on something like the Jesus Camp documentary that was Oscar nominated, whatever, in the early 2000s, a very manipulative sort of model of camping. And those camps do exist, but they are the minority, and we'll absolutely work against those because they're violating, again, that's why I come back to those 5 fundamentals. They're violating that safe space.
Yeah. And truly the safety of the space, the ability to live fully who you are in the camp experience is one of its unique, I think this is at times what people are calling magic. It's a very unique social culture that's generated in an isolated space away from everything else. And that's why it's possible. But that makes this possibility of living fully who you are in these spaces. And like you said, and the hope is that confidence is built, that they can transfer that back into their everyday lives within the structures and the society and the culture that might not make that space for them. How do they then take up that space or push back against the constraints of the spaces of who their identity really is, or who they really want to fully live and be?
And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is build humans for the world, not just to help them have a great experience here away from the world. We want to do that. We want them to have fun here and be safe here, but we also want them to send them out as better people to impact society. And so that's one of the things that our research is really focused on now, is how can we help camp directors see beyond their borders and see how they're able to partner with the home, with parents for formation, how they're able to partner with those natural partnership organizations, specifically in Christian camping, the churches, church leaders. How can we walk alongside one another? Because we're after the very same things. And we have these natural connections where the young people are here and in this space, and they're hearing these important messages of love and forgiveness and kindness and all these important concepts. And how can they be reinforced in very intentional ways so that it's not just, oh, that's my camp self, Or I can be safe and I can be who I am at camp, but the rest of the world is not safe. How can we create other spaces where they are safe and help empower them to be change agents in this world? It's ultimately what I want to do. Because, guys, this world is a mess. Like, this world needs good people working to change it and to do good in this world and to treat people with respect and kindness and love. And we've got a lot of work to do, but camps are doing great work.
Well, and
to make
camps
those
are
things
at a
happen.
stage in a space in children's lives that's transformative, and that's part of their development. Like, it's part of the building of
got
the
it.
DNA. So can we help young people to build into their DNA an approach to the world that is loving and not fear-based, that is one where we show kindness and show love in our actions and our words at all times, and hopefully not making decisions out of fear. And I think that's one of the sort of, I remember reading about this actually in a theological book about the opposite of love is fear, not hate. Hate's a byproduct of fear. And when you think about all the decisions that are being made in big macro sense and smaller senses, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of like, I can't stand up to this thing, or I will, there's a loss or a, this kind of anxiety that's constant and present.
And the people in power are leveraging that.
Absolutely. And the more
want
they leverage
to
it, the
make
more they
people
generate
afraid.
it.
They
Absolutely.
want to separate people. They want us
Yeah.
to distrust one another.
Yeah.
And camp is one of those places that can bring people together.
And
it's
real
a very special
evidence.
place because of that.
Yeah, real evidence of what trust looks like and feels like, and what it means to, like, that it is okay and that bad things don't happen when you trust other humans and participate. Yeah, it's an exceptional experience. And like you talked about earlier, that experiential learning of a thing, not just an abstract theoretical concept of trust.
Right.
It's that I lived in a community that functioned civically based on trust. Yeah.
And I experienced forgiveness. I didn't just learn about this as some amorphous concept, but like I actually wronged my cabin mate or my neighbor, or I got ticked off at them, and I experienced reconciliation. I experienced anger, and then I experienced reconciliation and love and forgiveness. And now I understand what that concept means because I actually lived it. Those are important things. And so it's funny, Mandi, you mentioned, and people say this sometimes, it's like camp is magic, and they talk about the magic of camp. And you and I, as researchers, we know that
We're like, what is
magic.
that?
Magic is what we call science when we don't understand it, right? But as social scientists, we understand the why of the magic of camp. And we understand why it works in the developmental process and how it can work alongside these other forces in these young people's lives and how it can be transformative. And helping people describe that is really important, and not just saying, oh, if we just do it the way we've always done it, then it's just going to happen. It's like, that's not how the magic works. The magic works in a very specific way. And there are very specific elements that need to be in place. And you can't just assume that they're in place because they were in place last year or last week.
Right. Yeah.
Because these specific campers are coming from very specific backgrounds. And how are you coming alongside them and building relationships with them and creating that safe space for them and making sure that they're participating and they're having that faith-centered experience? And so it all has to come together in this particular time for these particular campers.
From the communications perspective, also, it's using the word magic, which I fight against all the time in camp marketing, is magic is also the feeling of magic. Like, some people love the surprise, but there's a lot of similar feelings to being pranked. Like someone's doing something to me that I don't understand, and so that, I think there's some emotional realization we have to come to when we're using that language about campus. It has some implications that are bigger.
Absolutely. Yeah, the magic.
You said one of the
things. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jake.
Oh, I was just thinking the metrics of success as well. Sometimes,
right?
We think like, in order to be successful, the kids have to cry on the last night, otherwise we failed, or they have to come out a transformed person. And it's like, if you're using that as your metrics of success, then you're creating unrealistic expectations, but you're also creating this cookie cutter laboratory style understanding of what camp is and should be. And like magic, hocus pocus, boom, the rabbit comes out of the hat. That's not how camp works. And really understanding that we're trying to walk with these campers for a small part of their journey. We have this privilege of walking alongside them. And if we can help them and accompany them and impact them in small ways, then we can have transformative impact on some of their lives and on the world and so forth. So that's where we work on metrics in a lot of different ways. And we don't say, oh, if the kid didn't come out, a Christian who wants to go to church every day and thinks that God is the most important thing in their life, then if we didn't do that, then we fail. Of course not. If they come out with a little more self-confidence, if they come out with a little more understanding that this other person is not someone to be feared, but someone to be loved. Yeah. If they come out with a little more understanding that they matter in this world and that they have a calling in this world and that they're called to care for one another and this planet, then we've made some big successes.
I always talk about, I suppose my research is emotions, but I always talk about the metrics of kids have to be happy all the time at camp. And I was like, I'm a parent. If my kids are happy all the time, I'm not doing my job right, because there's things that would make them happy, like being on video games all day long, which is not okay by me in terms of healthy and rounded living, right? So, that idea of campers always have to be 100% happy, that's unrealistic and unfair to everybody, the camper, the counselors, the staff, the leadership, because it's this expectation, like you said, it's unrealistic. So we have to kind of readjust where we set our bars and make decisions about what's realistic and fair and reasonable and take some of that pressure away at the same time. That creates a lot of pressure.
Sometimes people talk about camp as sort of the escape from the real world and things like that. And I think it's more of an encounter of it in a different way. And so camp, one of the things that we do really, really well is we're okay with the mess. We're okay with kids getting muddy. We're okay with, kids doing crazy things and doing things that might not normally do in other spaces, but we're also okay with the mess of emotions that happens and really leaning into that and leaning into some of these real world concerns. And you hear this from campers, we do focus groups all the time and we also do the survey research, but this was the first place that I was able to say this, and what was that? Was it not sure about being, your gender identity or your sexual orientation or your faith or your worth in this world, or admitting to something that I've experienced in the home or done to somebody else, and trying to process those things. So it being a safe space for some of those things to come out is a gift that camp has. And it makes for one heck of a mess. And not always like we're sitting around being happy. Sometimes it's really hard, and being okay with that and really encountering that and not saying, okay, let's go play a game. That's not how we work at camp, right? We do a lot of games, but we also get real in ways that the quote unquote real world doesn't always get.
Jake, I really appreciate your perspective, and Mandi and I have already committed to each other. We're going to bring you back on to talk on some other topics of your research we just didn't have time for, but that we think are really important. So we look forward to that. I wonder for you if there are some areas of the camp experience that should have more research that aren't getting enough.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So it's funny. I was just at the American Camp Association National Conference. There's always a research forum there. And one of the things that, Deb Bileski and Carla Henderson are kind of the godmothers of research in camping. Yeah. And they've just done so much amazing stuff. They zoomed in. And one of the things that they say sometimes, and they said again this week, is we've answered all the easy questions. Like we've shown that camp can have an impact. We've shown that those impacts last. We've done a lot of these easy things. Now it's hard. Now it's time to dive into some of the harder questions.
Stuff. Yeah.
So I love that. And so what I want to acknowledge is, one, that a lot of that research is happening. So some of the research that we're like, oh, there's gaps. People are doing it right now. It's such an exciting time to be involved in camping research. And this is happening at academic institutions and with student projects and with other things too. So one of the things that I'm super interested in, partly because of one of the big research projects we're after right now, is called Rhythms of Faith. We're looking at how does the camp experience impact the home specifically? And how can we walk alongside the camp experience to impact conversations among campers and their parents, faith practices in the home, the understanding that this matters in their life, and bring families closer together and connect them with church and things like that. And one of the things that we keep hearing from the folks that we talk with is, oh yeah, overnight camp is great, or day camp is great with some of these things, but where we really build family connection is at family camp.
Yeah.
And so that's a long-winded way of coming around to the answer to your question. I would love for more research to be done on family camp, because it's a growing part of the industry. Yep. And I would just love to see some of the best practices of how are we bringing families, not just bringing them together. Like, okay, you can sort of say, okay, we bring them together and then we just let it happen. But are there specific programmatic things that we can do to help families function in a more healthy way, and parents to listen to their children in better ways, and kids to open up to their parents? I mean, I think that's an area ripe for research right now.
And nobody's touched it that I know of. There's just absolutely zero on the, there might be literature out there. I haven't found it yet. It's a big space that hasn't been touched.
Maybe somebody listening can help us if there is something.
Yes,
they can let
please.
us know. But also, like, it's a space to investigate for sure.
I think
Do
growing...
that research. We promise you a platform to talk about it.
Yeah,
I
right.
appreciate that.
And it's clearly a growing need. Families are wanting to come together. They're struggling. They're being pulled in lots of different directions. It's such an exciting space. And I think the industry has a massive opportunity to engage in it more. And not just through the summer, I would say through the whole retreats. I think that also has a huge call. There's a space there. There's a need there.
Yeah.
Who do you think we should talk to next? What researcher would you recommend or
gosh.
research we should look at next?
I mean, there's so many people doing such great work out there. Like, I could recommend a dozen or more people. If you haven't talked with Jim Sibthorpe from the University of Utah, I would say definitely talk with him about some of the amazing research that they've done and the youth impact study and things like that. But also, I would say Barry Garst, if you haven't talked with him, make sure to get him on and hear from some of the great things that they're doing at Clemson and some of the work with medical specialty camps, but also some of the student research and things. It's just, those guys are just doing such great research and really pushing the field forward. And so if you haven't had them on, I would say those would be the top two. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention my Jewish colleague in camp research, Neela Rosen. She would be a great person to have on as well.
Sounds good. Where should folks go to find your research? How can they follow up with you?
Yeah, they can follow up with me. The website's the easiest place to go. That's sacredplaygrounds.com. So that's plural, sacredplaygrounds.com. And my email is jake@sacredplaygrounds.com. And so there's lots of different ways to contact us there. We've got a podcast called Sacred Playgrounds. Please listen and hear about the research. We do things like weekly newsletters with updates about the research that we've got. And there's also a book called Sacred Playgrounds. So you can dive into the research with that. And if you're in the academic fields, there's peer-reviewed stuff out there too. So you can find that on all the search platforms that you would use at your university's library. And so there's lots of different places to go to connect with the research in a very practical way and also more of an academic way.
That's great. Jake, thanks so much for being on the pudding.
Thanks so much for having me. You guys are doing amazing work, and I appreciate the partnership and the collegiality.
And if you didn't know, now you know, Camp Pros.